Hello. Good afternoon. This is the Constrictor, and I'd like to welcome you to the Bureau of Occult Affairs. On my desk has been sitting a document that reads Her Majesty's ship, the K17. It holds a picture of a submarine that was built by the Dutch in 1933, and it sunk in 1941. This document tells us a lot about this particular submarine, but at page 71 of the document, a remarkable story comes across. It is called The Paladin, True and Untrue. And this is why this document is part of the investigations of the Bureau of Occult Affairs. The document is written in Dutch, so I'll have to translate into English. On the 28th of November, 1941, 5 minutes after 12 in the afternoon, a Dutch submarine, the K17, approaches under the command of Lieutenant at Sea Besançon, a position in the Pacific Ocean, 43.3 and 155.2. About 280 miles northeast of the Japanese Takan Bay. Here, on board the K-17, they discover a fleet of Japanese warships following a zigzag course. Besançon judges, rightfully so, that this course in a straight line would come to 88 degrees and that the war fleet will carry itself across the ocean to Hawaii and Pearl Harbor, about 800 sea miles ahead. In the night of 7 December 1941, K-17 submarine perished, man and mouse, in the Pacific Ocean, due to sabotage by the British Secret Service. The only sin the Dutch had committed was their discovery that the Japanese fleet was heading for Pearl Harbor. This news deliberately was to be held back to ensure that the Americans would become involved in the World War. One judged it of the most and utmost essence that the Dutch would take this secret in their sailor's grave. This was said by Sir Christopher Kraton, former officer of the British Secret Service, Section M, who, according to his own records, personally blew up Her Majesty's ship, the K-17, at the joint command of Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt, and with the necessary, though difficultly acquired, agreement of the Dutch Queen Wilhelmina. And after the K-17 had been destroyed, Kraton personally reported to the Queen. Here at the Bureau of Occult Affairs, we give you Sir Christopher Kraton's story. I realize that you shall not want to believe my story. The only thing that I can say is that I have tried my utmost to tell you the truth about an operation that took place more than 50 years ago, and of which, as is common in these sort of affairs, very few documents remain. I have to add that my imagination lacks particularly. I could have impossibly come up with this story, and I have no inclination to understand how otherwise I could have had such detailed technical data. On the contrary, I have to trust my own memories and the official reports of me and my colleagues that were written immediately after the events took place. During and after the Second World War, my job as a secret agent required the utmost trust. And although Sir Winston Churchill and Lord Mountbatten gave me permission, written in black and white, to tell my story, I have had to promise them to wait with telling my story after their deaths. Unfortunately, some incidents I wasn't able to commit to writing, partly in the interests of the people that would be mentioned, and partly to meet the requirements and the desires of a few very important European politicians. Once again, this is my personal story. You may believe it or not. Because like Aristotle, I am only interested in the truth and not in what people believe. The decision to destroy the Dutch submarine, Her Majesty's ship, the K17, was taken for the following reasons. On the 28th of November 1941, when Lieutenant at Sea Besançon spotted the Japanese fleet, who apparently was heading towards Pearl Harbor, he immediately encrypted a coded message to the British Marine Supreme Command in the Far East, underneath which the Dutch operated. The message was intercepted by the section cryptology of the Section M in Singapore. Within a few hours, copies of the message arrived in Washington, solely to be seen by General Donovan personally, and in London by Major Desmond Morton. Both informed their respective chiefs, President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. These four people already knew that Japan intended to attack Pearl Harbor, and they had prayed that nothing would come in the way of the Japanese. In that time, 80% of the American population stood for a specific point of view of isolation. And the American population were fiercely against a war with Japan or Germany. If President Roosevelt were to declare war against Japan without any attacks on American targets, then the chances were very severe that he would have to stand down. Vice versa, if America were to stay isolated from the war, as concluded Morton and Donovan, the Japanese would have free game, and without hindrance, they were to occupy India, Australia, New Zealand, and all other countries in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. It would probably be impossible to free these countries in a later stage. Above all this, the British and their allies needed the aid of America in their combat against Germany. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, it would be certain that America and the American population would interfere in the war. But if and when the British and American leaders of this attack were yet informed before it happened, then why weren't the American forces in Pearl Harbor informed and prepared? And why did not the American warships get the command to sail? Weren't they much safer at sea, and were they able to fight back? According to officials, the Marine base could have been defended successfully. The answer to this question, why nothing happened, is simple. In Hawaii, there were thousands of Japanese immigrants. Most of them were very loyal to their new fatherland, America. But some had been spying for Japan. Above all, the Japanese consulate general was fiercely active. When the base would have been readied and prepared, the Japanese Supreme Command would have known within a few hours. The attack would stand down by the Emperor Hirohito, who insisted that the attack would be a complete surprise. President Roosevelt would not have had a reason to join America in the war efforts, and that would be terrible for the Allied forces. Of course, it is obvious what the problem was on the 28th of November 1941, when Her Majesty's ship, the K17, got involved. Because if the people would know that Roosevelt and Churchill knew in advance of the attack on Pearl Harbor and would have done nothing to prevent it, not only their careers would have ended, but probably also the entire Allied forces would have fell apart. Then the Japanese would have had free game, and they could conquer and plunder half the world. As soon as the message was received from the submarine, the whole affair was surrounded by a wall of absolute silence. The K-17 was summoned to turn back to the base in Singapore for fueling. The submarine was not allowed to enter the port, and they were under no circumstances in any other message to hint at the Japanese fleet. Under the name of Lieutenant at Sea Paul Hammond, one of my names, that was in the name and ranking list of British naval officers, I, Christopher Kraton, travelled with a Berwick flying boat with extra special fuel tanks through Nova Scotia, San Francisco, to the island Wake, to the Northern Marianas, where I, according to my agreements, I went on board of the K-17 on the 6th of December, 1941. In that stage of the war, the Dutch submarines in the Far East were operating under British Marine Naval Command. And in my possession were documents of the head of the submarine service, Admiral Sir Max Horton, the Supreme Commander of the Free Dutch Naval Forces in London, and of Queen Wilhelmina, who resided in Reading, Berkshire. These documents gave me the authority to give Lieutenant at Sea Besançon operational assignments in the name of the British Admiralty. Although nobody on board the K-17 had any idea for what purpose I wanted to use this authority. This was also the case with Lieutenant at Sea Besançon. At one of the small Marianas, just south of Pagan, about 800 sea miles south of Japan, freights were loaded from the Berwick flying boat into the submarine. The crew was told that it held Christmas presents of their colleagues in England. Most crates, indeed, contained Geneva, whiskey, beer, champagne, and other Christmas trinkets. But one crate held cyanide gas, and two other crates held explosives and fueling mechanisms with time switches. I waited for a decoded radio signal. In case the Japanese fleet were to abandon her attack on Pearl Harbor, my operation would be obsolete and cancelled. The next day, on Sunday, the 7th of December, 1941, I was ordered to proceed with the operation. The Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. That night, I left the K-17 and went back to the Berwick. Half an hour later, the deadly cyanide gas was released, and one saw how the crew tried to escape from the submarine. A little later, the ship exploded and sank. I assessed there were no survivors. Thus written by Christopher Kraton in London, August 1996. Here ends the report of the Bureau of Occult Affairs. Good evening.
Here is the motion picture record released by the United States Navy of the havoc wrought by the Japs' sneak sky and sea raid on Pearl Harbor, America's mid-Pacific naval bastion. On December 7th, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards. Costly to our Navy was the loss of war vessels, airplanes, and equipment, but more costly to Japan was the effectiveness of its foul attack in immediately unifying America in its determination to fight and win the war thrust upon it, and to win the peace.